and they'll come in and have the adoptive family with the parent. With the child, and the judge will do the adoption there, and then they usually have a big party. In some counties, like in some of your counties, Benzie and Mecosta and Osceola, some of the counties you represent, they might not have an actual adoption proceeding, but they might have an adoption fair and invite people locally to come in and learn about adoption, about the process of adoption, and it's not all that hard. Interestingly, in Michigan, a lot of our adoptions come out of foster care. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to be a foster parent, but a majority of our adoptions, last year, I think about 2,800 adoptions occurred, and a majority of those were from people who were foster parents to begin with.
Can you walk through kind of the steps, of a child, the parental rights are terminated,
right.
Where that child goes, how right. an adoption process works in the state? Because, in northern Michigan, there's a lot of adoption and a lot of people seeking adoption, and they seek it at different fronts. Some
right.
go to foreign countries, others,
right.
Work
yeah.
with the state.
Yeah.
If you were going to work, if you were thinking about adopting, how would that process work? And I guess talk about that.
Okay.
But before
right.
that, how does that child even become available?
All right. Well, let's say the child becomes available in the first place because their natural parents' rights are terminated. And the Department of Human Services is the agency that's assigned responsibility for that in our state government. After that child's rights are terminated, their case is assigned to an adoption worker. And that adoption worker's job is to do adoption planning for that child, or permanency planning, as it's called, to try to get a permanent plan for that child. And that, once the child is available, then there's an effort made in conjunction with the court to find an adoptive home. Now, if you're coming from the other end, let's say some of your listeners are interested in becoming either foster parents or adoptive parents, they could go through the Department of Human Services, your local Department of Human Services. They have adoption case workers. We also have something in Michigan called the Michigan Adoption Resource Exchange. MARE is short for MARE, and the children who are available for adoption are listed on that register. They've got an 800 number, and I think we've given it here,
yeah.
And a website that people can take a look at if they're interested in proceeding. Is it expensive to adopt? I think there's a
That's
myth
a good
about
question.
that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of subsidies available to help with the expenses of adoption, and there's even subsidies available to help people who are poor or perhaps can't afford it, to pay the court filing fees, for example, to pay for birth certificates for the children. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that the state will help people who are interested in adoption. There's adoption subsidies available, post-adoption, to help with the costs of raising the adopted child. Some of our children in care have medical problems, so there's medical subsidies available for these kids. So it is not designed to bankrupt anyone who's so good to be willing to take one of these kids into their home. The state really wants to help partner with them.
So that's if you want to adopt. How do you become a foster parent?
Same way, you would contact the Department of Human Services and your local office and tell them that you're interested in becoming a foster parent. All you have to be is 21 years old. You don't need to be married. You can be single. You have to be licensed, and it takes about 6 months to go through the licensing process. And you're investigated. Of course, you couldn't have a criminal record. Those sorts of things would be barred. That's what would go on during the investigation. But it takes some time to get a license, but many people do succeed, and we're always needing good foster parents and good adoptive parents in our state.
Some of the myths of adoption here at the state level, or just in the United States, is that it takes a very long time.
Right.
And that sometimes you adopt that child, and then the parents come back into the picture. I mean,
Right.
there's a few myths right there. Maybe you could
I can talk
dispel
about that.
those, and then maybe some
I
of the
know
other myths.
audiences I've talked to over the years, a lot of people think the courts are going to take the baby away. And I can tell you that in the last 20 years, the Michigan Supreme Court has actually stopped 2 cases. That's all. But the cases tend to get a lot of publicity, so people think I can't keep that child. We've had 25,000 children adopted out of foster care in the last 10 years, and in only 2 cases was there a reversal. So it's just false to think that the courts are going to interfere. The other myth that, again, I'm trying to explode is this notion that there's no kids available. And a lot of people want to go to foreign countries because they think there's no children available in Michigan. But like I said, there's 4,400 available right now who are waiting to have, parents.
What's the barrier? Why aren't those children? I mean, I know so many folks that are trying to adopt. Are they looking for babies?
Many people are looking for babies right now, and actually DHS is trying to change the incentives because we know we need our older children adopted, so they're trying to increase the amount of subsidies available for adopting older children.
To help with some of the
to
problems?
help with some of the issues that the older kids face. But yeah, many people do want to have babies to adopt. But I mean, actually, the children are sprinkled across, from 0 to age 18, and there's a fair amount of them available at every age group. So we do have plenty of kids right here in Michigan.
What do you think is different about adopting in Michigan or the United States versus maybe another country? We've seen an explosion of adopting children from other countries.
Right.
Is it that some countries have foster care, don't they?
Yes.
And they don't. They're not in the little.
I think there's this sort of perception that the legal system isn't as difficult in the foreign countries. Although you certainly can talk to parents who've gone the foreign adoption route, and they can tell you horror stories about things that have occurred to them, whether in countries where they've gone, whether it's Vietnam or some people who have adopted Russian babies, and there's many stories of foreign adoptions that can go sour. But there's many Michigan adoptions that are very successful. One other problem that there's been in the past is a sense that you weren't getting the whole story about this child. And I think we've done a lot and are continuing to do more to make sure that you get full information about the child you're adopting. So that if there's medical issues with that child, if that child was, God forbid, sexually abused, you know it. That you're not...
There's a complete history?
Right, that you can get a complete history, and that all of the issues that child might have confronted are known to the parents who would be adopting is highly critical.
And that wasn't like that in the past then, would you say?
No, there's been a fair amount of secrecy, and there's also federal issues about disclosure of medical records that have sometimes caused problems under federal law. So there's an effort on a lot of people's parts to work through some of our issues. And I think on the part of people in government like myself, that there has to be a commitment to wade through the bureaucracy to try to figure out how can we make this system improve, how can we make it better. One of the things that I've worked really hard on is to cut down the time that child is in care so that we can make sure the child is freed up to be adopted at an earlier time.
Earlier age?
Right,
you mean?
yes,
Okay.
at an earlier age, because I look at cases in our system, Senator, and I think about all the cases that come through the courts, and I can't even imagine a more important case than the future of a child. I mean, that's number one to me.
Yeah.
It can be $100 million verdict that isn't as important as to what happens to that baby. So we have made a concerted effort in our appellate courts and at the Supreme Court to move the cases and to look at every case every week so it never gets lost in the system. And that's what we do. And we have reduced the time that it takes us at our level to get through these cases. So at one point we were at 18 months to to move the case, and now we're down around 6 months between the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court to move our cases through so the children aren't waiting.